Triangle congruence by postulates, part 2. So we're going to go over 2 more postulates. So the angle side angle postulate is if one triangle has 2 angles and the included side that are congruent to a second triangle's 2 angles and the included side, then the triangles are congruent. Or if you have the angle side postulates, states that if you have one triangle that has 2 angles and the non-included side that are congruent to a second triangle's 2 angles and the corresponding non-included side, then the triangles are congruent. So let's go over the examples. Example 1. If the following are true, the segment YU is congruent to WU, then, and also the angle X is congruent to the angle V, we're going to prove the following, which is the triangle YXU is congruent to the triangle WVU. So let's go into our statements and then our reasons. So the first one is just given, right? So we have 2 givens. Now, what have we shown? Right, so here's a tick mark, here's 1 tick mark. So this segment is congruent to this segment, right? And this angle is congruent to that angle. So if we're going over, looks like what are we going over? Looks like we're going over angle, side, angle, or angle, side. So let's go over what else could we figure out based upon this. Well, if we remember back in an earlier video, vertical angles are congruent. So this angle here and this angle here would be congruent to each other. So let's go ahead and write that out. So we have the angle YUX is congruent to the angle. We have to make sure we're consistent, so we went with the Y. So now we need to do the WUV. So we ended with those 2 angles that are congruent to each other. And this is, and for the reason, it's just vertical angles are congruent. So let's go over. So if we have this angle, and this side is congruent to this angle, and this angle, and this side, what postulate should we use? Well, it's the angle, side postulate. Right? It's the non-included side, right? This side is not in between the 2 angles. So we use our, right, we use the angle, side postulate. Example 2. If the following are true, so the segment FC is congruent to JC and angle F is congruent to angle J, we're going to prove the following triangles are congruent then. So let's go ahead and write our statements. And then the reasons. So let's go with the segments that are congruent. And then the angles that are congruent. And it's just given to us. So notice we have done this angle and this angle, this side and this side, which are congruent to each other on these 2 corresponding triangles. Now, like the last example, this angle here and this angle here, well, they're congruent. And the reason is because they're vertical angles and they're congruent if they're vertical angles. So let's go angle. We're going to go FCG, which is congruent to JCH. And the reason is vertical angles are congruent. And so we can go ahead and say the triangles triangle FCG is congruent to triangle JCH, and the reason is, well, we can see we have an angle, side, angle. So angle, side, angle, because the side is the included side, so it's between the two angles. And so we can say this is by the angle, side, angle postulate. And then we're done.